Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Freer Gallery. Welcome to the New Year of the Rabbit 2011. Happy New Year to everyone. This is a wonderful way to begin the new year, and I was really thrilled when I woke up this morning and found that there was no snow, the sun was shining, the weather was kind to us. It's a great pleasure to introduce today's talk by Dr. Andrew Maske, who teaches at the University of Kentucky. This is a talk that relates very closely to a project to which Andy Maske has committed a long part of his scholarly career, starting when, by a wonderful coincidence in a way, he went to southern Japan, to the city of Fukuoka, and spent a year there as an exchange student. He liked it so much that he went back again and spent a couple of years there as a research student, getting to know in particular about the ceramics produced in that area. And eventually he went on to Oxford University, where he wrote his PhD with Dr. Oliver Impey, one of the great scholars of Japanese ceramics. He wrote his PhD on Takatori ware, the ware that is produced in the former province, now the prefecture, in which the city of Fukuoka, where he was living, was produced. So he's closely tied to that area through long experience. He received his PhD in 1995, and since then, I know, has been working slowly and steadily, polishing his research and producing a wonderful final manuscript. The book that represents the culmination of all of this long, careful, thoughtful work is about to be published, and by the door at the entrance, you'll find a flyer from the publisher that will give you a discount if you go online to place an advance order. The book will be published later this year. We were hoping that we could have piles of it on a table and have Andy sign the book after his talk, but the timing didn't work out quite perfectly. Nonetheless, it will be available very soon. The title of the book is Potters and Patrons in Edo Period Japan, Takatori Ware and the Kuroda Domain. And the title of Andy's talk today, as you can see, picks up on that theme, takes a broader look at the framework for the particular story of Takatori ware by looking more broadly at elite ceramics in the Edo period. And his talk is titled On the Trail of Tea Bowls, Tracing Elite Ceramics in Edo Period Japan. After Andy gives his talk, we thought that rather than taking questions and giving answers here, we would go up to the exhibition, Cornucopia, Ceramics from Southern Japan, and take questions in the gallery in front of actual objects. It's always much more fun to talk about things that way. And this reminds me to remind you that today is the last day of the exhibition Cornucopia, so you have one more chance to see it. It represents the collection of ceramics from southern Japan, including many Takatori wares in the Freer collection. And so the specific occasion for us to invite Andy at long last to give a Pope Memorial lecture was the closing of this exhibition. He knows many of those wares in the cases very well, having visited them many times, and tomorrow we'll spend another day looking at them again. This lecture is part of a long-standing series which began in 1983 called the Pope Memorial Lecture. It's named after John Pope, who was a curator and a director for some time at the Freer Gallery with a special interest in Chinese ceramics. Andy's lecture is the 19th in a long series that has taken place more or less every year with some gaps, representing scholars from around the world coming to talk about ceramics from China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, It's a wonderful series that is supported now by our visitors and supporters of the museum, and we hope to continue it long into the future. So I would like to invite you to welcome Dr. Andrew Maske for his talk on tracing tea bowls. Whoops, I got the wrong title. On the Trail of Tea Bowls, Tracing Elite Ceramics in Edo Period Japan. Andy.
Well, it's truly a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for the wonderfully warm introduction, Louise. It is a great honor to speak for you today for the Pope Memorial Lecture, particularly because John Pope was, as Louise said, a scholar of Asian ceramics who was very well known and influential and published widely on the subject. In today's talk, I'd like to look at the culture of elite ceramics in 17th century Japan, a time known as the early Edo period. Before I do, however, I need to talk briefly about ceramics before the Edo period. Over the past decades, there's been a great deal of interest in the ceramics of the Muromachi and Momoyama periods, basically the late 14th century through the middle part of the 16th century, including unglazed ceramics like bizen and shigaraki ware that we see here on the left and right. In addition, ceramics from the Momoyama period include raku ware, which has a contemporary incarnation in this country, American raku, which typically looks quite a bit different from traditional Japanese raku, and also shino ware, another Japanese-originated ceramic type that has its own American incarnation in things such as American shino, carbon trap shino, and that sort of thing. Those of you who are ceramists will be familiar with that. Well, I believe that part of the reason that there's been so much interest in earlier Japanese ceramics is because that period, the Muromachi and Momoyama periods, had production that reflects a tremendous amount of freedom and creativity at a time when a variety of native and foreign influences were exerting a great impact on Japanese aesthetics. In a sense, the Momoyama period was the Wild West in terms of aesthetics in Japan. Ceramics producing areas such as Mino were developing new ceramic types such as shino that we see here, in response to the fact that the most powerful people in Japan were enthusiastic about the practice of formalized tea drinking, called cha-no-yu, or sometimes suki, including the ruler Toyotomi Hideyoshi, shown here. Although it's rather difficult for us to comprehend in 21st century America, many Japanese warlords of the 16th and 17th centuries spent a considerable amount of their time engaged in making tea for each other and competing with each other to acquire rare and unusual utensils with which to do so. Active trade enabled both ceramic wares and ceramics artisans to be brought from other countries during the Momoyama period, including China, Korea, and this is a famous example of a Korean tea bowl, and Southeast Asia. The latter, the importation of ceramics artisans, allowed the adoption of new firing techniques and gave birth to new ceramic ware types, such as karatsu ware, which was begun by immigrant Korean potters towards the end of the 16th century. It was during the Momoyama period that the idea became widespread that Japanese ceramics, as opposed to imported foreign wares, could qualify as elite utensils. Prior to that time, imported utensils, such as this type of Chinese bowl, were considered the most desirable ceramics for the wealthy and powerful. Imported ceramics were not only expensive, but were beyond the capabilities of Japanese craftsmen to accurately imitate. Here we can compare a Japanese tenmoku-style bowl with its Chinese model, the Japanese example being on the right, the Chinese on the left. Although it's difficult to see, the Chinese bowl is much more thinly and cleanly formed than the Seto example, even though it was made several hundred years earlier. The first class of the most precious objects were vessels for holding tea. The large tea leaf jars known as chatsubo, which you see here, and the tiny jars known as tea caddies or chaire. Although a few domestic production areas made these shapes, the most prized examples were always Chinese. And we see that reflected in the fact that Chinese tea caddies, such as this one, were treated with such formality that whenever they were displayed, they had to be displayed, or custom required that they be displayed on a lacquered tray, as we see them here. The warfare of the late 15th and 16th centuries resulted in the destruction of many fine imported Chinese utensils. So raising the appreciation of Japanese tea wares to a higher level was as much a necessity as it was a preference. The activities of Senno Rikyu as tea master for the Momoyama period ruler Toyotomi Hideyoshi, whose portrait we just saw, have been the subject of intense interest for more than 400 years, and native ceramics of the types that he is thought to have preferred have been carefully and lovingly used and handed down since the 16th century. The subtle and restrained Japanese vessels selected for use by Rikyu are widely considered to represent the triumph of Japanese originality and aesthetic taste over the formal and codified formats typical of Chinese ceramics. Rikyu's successor, Furuta Oribe, took the idiosyncratic nature of Japanese tea ceramics even further than Rikyu. Oribe's aesthetic taste emphasized the eccentric, if not the bizarre, in both form and decoration of tea ceramics. Distorted shapes, such as seen in this jar, played an important role even in tea houses devised by Oribe. Here's the bowl. Here's a bowl that Oribe is thought to have influenced the shape of. Oribe himself, even though we have Oribe ware, it was not made by Furuta Oribe. They are made in a style that is thought to have been strongly influenced by him. This is a view of a part of a tea hut that Furuta Oribe designed, and you can see that he's added a sense of drama to the interior, rather than having the person making tea simply sit in the same area as the guest. He's created a division here. The person making tea would sit here, and this sort of semi-wall presents a sort of screen or sense of separation. And he purposely chose an irregularly shaped support here. And that's very typical of his approach to aesthetics in all different media. We can also see this pillar right here. Rather than being left natural or simply finished in an ordinary way, it has these sort of diagonal or horizontal axe marks left on it, made purposely to look very rough. So Oribe was very interested in the unique aspects, emphasizing the unique or idiosyncratic nature of various shapes connected with tea, including tea utensils. Well, although the Momoyama period was a time of great artistic creativity, the freedom that the period involved could not be allowed to continue without limit. In the year 1603, the warlord Tokugawa Ieyasu, who had vanquished all his serious military rivals, was named shogun, marking the start of a new era of stability for Japan. Both of Ieyasu's predecessors, while achieving significant military success in unifying the country, had failed to found a hereditary dynasty to preserve their accomplishments. The Momoyama period style of rule had inherent dangers, and Tokugawa Ieyasu did not want to make the same mistakes as his forebears. Even the world of tea was dangerous. Both Sen no Rikyu and Furuta Oribe, tea masters though they were, ended their lives violently. They, in fact, both were condemned to commit seppuku, or self-disembowelment. In 16th and 17th century Japan, the world of formal tea drinking was serious business, and so was the world of ceramics associated with it. Ieyasu put an end to the practice of warlords attacking each other in hopes of expanding their territory. He controlled all land distribution and could increase or decrease the territory of a lord as he wished, or remove him from his domain altogether. He could then give that territory to someone else who he preferred. The largest domains, as might be expected, were allotted to those warlords who had allied themselves with Ieyasu in his rise to power, but they were arranged in ways to prevent anti-Tokugawa alliances from forming by dispersing Ieyasu's closest allies between domains led by former foes or less reliable partners. With less money needed for maintaining armies and fighting wars, Japan's warlords found they had more to spend on other things, including ceramics. Although the authoritarian government created by the Tokugawa soon came up with a variety of expensive ceremonial obligations to prevent potential rivals from accumulating too much wealth, there was still enough in the new era of peace and prosperity to foster the development of new ceramic types and styles. And this is a view of the traditional provinces of Japan, which were divided up among the warlords. It's quite an old map, so some of the words such as Kyushu are spelled differently than we spell them today. Hondo here is actually Honshu. We refer to it as Honshu. In the past, it was sometimes referred to as Hondo. This map is probably 100 years old or more. Among the most important new ceramic types developed in Edo period Japan was Arita porcelain, made of porcelain stone discovered in southwestern Japan by some of the same potters from Korea who had established Karatsu stoneware. Here's a view of the site of the raw material for porcelain that was discovered around the year 1615. In the 1640s, the technique for applying overglazed enamels was achieved in Japan, probably with technology imported from China. Soon, Japanese decorators were using enamels to create dishes such as this one that were unlike anything ever previously seen in Asia. It is thought that dishes such as this and this took hints from gold leaf Japanese screens for their decoration. And here we see a screen from around the same time, or slightly earlier, that's in the Freer collection. These large dishes with the so-called kokutani decoration were particularly avidly collected by the Maeda family, rulers of the largest domain in Japan besides that of the shogun. The Maeda had so many of these dishes that eventually it was thought that the dishes themselves were made within the Maeda domain, not in Orita. In fact, there is evidence to suggest that the Maeda may have tried to produce these dishes themselves. This particular example always reminds me of a Van Gogh painting, although in some sense, although it was made more than 200 years before Van Gogh. Of course, large dishes like these had no place in tea gatherings. They were used in lavish banquets, just the sort of thing a warlord of power and ease would hold. However, the same technique of overglaze enameling was being used around the same time for tea utensils, but in a different geographic setting, in Kyoto, Japan's ancient capital. There, a ceramist named Nonomura Ninsei founded a kiln in the Ninnaji, a Buddhist temple with connections to Japan's imperial court. By training at a number of different ceramic production sites, Ninsei gained a very deep understanding of a wide range of techniques, including use of enamels. However, as you will notice on this beautiful tea leaf jar, the enamels are used on stoneware, not porcelain, and again are arranged in ways never seen on Chinese enameled wares. Ninsei was assisted in his ceramic production by a man named Kanamori Sowa. First, let me show you this another screen from the Freer collection, and you can see the similarities in how the blossoms are arranged in a naturalistic manner, but leaving out much of the background so that the focus is very much on the flowers themselves. Now, Kanamori Sowa had been born as the heir to a warlord family, but he was ironically disinherited because he criticized his father's military support of Tokugawa Ieyasu, who, of course, by that time was, who soon became the shogun. Fortunately for him, Sowa was not hunted down and executed, but was allowed to become a tea master in Kyoto, and in fact met up with the ceramic artist Ninsei and assisted him in designing his ceramics. He no doubt used his connections to help Ninsei market his pieces as well. In fact, not long after the establishment of Ninsei's workshop, pieces such as this one were being avidly collected by warlord families, and examples were even being sent as gifts to the shogun. There is a document, a record of things that occurred in the related to the activities of the shogunal family called the Tokugawa Jikki, and there are records of ceramics by Ninsei coming to the shogun's castle in Edo. Well, as you can see by looking at wares such as this, the taste in elite ceramics had changed dramatically from the preference for rough, distorted wares in the early 17th century. However, there remained affection for the old ceramic types, which continued, of course, to be handed down as heirloom pieces. Ninsei bought into this by creating his own versions of traditional Japanese wares. For example, this tea leaf jar here in the Freer, that is in the style of Seto ware, is very different from Ninsei's overglaze enamel pieces, but it retains the elegance that he lent to all of his works. Ninsei also made works in the style of a ceramic type called Takatori Ware, a style that, like karatsu, was founded by potters who were brought from Korea in the time of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Takatori production was, in the first instance, sponsored by a father and son pair of warlords by the name of Kuroda, and you can see portraits of them here. Early on, the kiln made wares in the distorted oribe style, such as this tea caddy here in the friar. But in the 1620s, the Takatori workshop was one of the first to change to a more elegant style, a style attributed to yet another tea master named Kobori Enshu. Enshu promoted ceramics that were more subtle than those of oribe, but had a cleaner and more graceful feel to them. Takatori ware was a perfect foil to the overglazed enameled pieces from Ninsei's kiln and Arita's Kokutani style, because its pieces provided a sense of visual repose without being staid and uninteresting. In fact, when I lived in Japan on the southern island of Kyushu, there were a great many porcelain wares that one could see if you went around to antique shops and that sort of thing that I like to do. And one of the comments I often got from antique shop dealers was they got tired of looking at so much porcelain. It was the same island in which the Arita kilns were located. And the Arita kilns, there were many, many kilns. They produced over the entire Edo period. And so there were a lot of products. And they challenged me by saying, well, you're probably here to look at Arita porcelain. You wouldn't understand karatsu ware. And soon I got to thinking, well, I might. and that's in fact how I got first interested in Japanese stonewares. But it was interesting that they saw the stonewares as being more relaxing to look at. And no doubt that's part of the reason that they are used predominantly in the Japanese tea ceremony. Well, the Takatori wares that Enshu promoted had a cleaner and yet a more graceful, a cleaner and more graceful feel to them than the earlier oribe ceramics, as I've mentioned. And the Takatori craftsmen were particularly adept at making tea caddies, the tiny containers used for holding powdered green tea. And as we saw, the first tea caddies were imported from China, and then later they were copied at the Seto kilns. The Kuroda lord who worked most closely with Kobori Enshu, Kuroda Tadayuki, was very eager to establish the Kuroda Domain as a cultured and sophisticated place. So he sent examples of Takatori tea caddies to the second Tokugawa shogun, Hidetada, should see here, as gifts. In fact, Tadayuki wrote to one of his own retainers that, he says to him, "You recently wrote to the Takatori ware people, or the Takatori yakimono mono, the people who make Takatori ware. You wrote to them to be more conscientious in their tea caddies. Those new pieces, as directed, must be fired. Of the tea caddies fired previously, if there's a good piece among them, send it immediately to Shokoku-sama," and that was the honorific name for the man you see on the screen, for the shogun Hidetada, so that he might view it, and you must order the potters to produce even finer results. So here we have the lord of a domain in Japan being involved in ceramic production of all things, to the point that he's giving specific directions to his retainers about what types of pieces the craftsmen should make and where they should be sent, even to places like the shogun's castle all the way in Edo. Let me go back here. Here we can see one of these tea caddies. On other occasions, Tadayuki was writing back and forth to the tea master Kobori Enshu, asking him to do things such as put names or assign poetic names to specific tea caddies. I would imagine that unless you're a teaware collector, no one here has any ceramics in their house that have their own name. It's a very foreign concept to us, but in Japan, in the world of tea, it's relatively common, although only the best tea utensils are assigned names, and it's not that any person can just make up a name for a tea caddy or a tea bowl and say, well, I think I'm going to call it Summer Moon or something like that. The names have to be devised typically by a tea master who may look at ancient poetry and pick out a name from some 12th century poetic anthology and assign it to a specific tea utensil. Tea caddies are actually the utensils that are most commonly given names, and tea caddies were indeed the focus of the tea master Kobori Enshu. Here we see a tea caddy that was selected by Enshu as worthy of having a name, it's a particular shape that, because of its long sort of body or neck, is known as a crane's neck shape. So a tea caddy of this shape would be called a crane's neck type tea caddy, and because of that, he gave it the name crane head, which sort of places it towards the front rank of tea caddies that have that shape. And on the right, you can see the box that has the actual hand inscription of the tea master Kobori Enshu. Both the box both the tea caddy and the box in which it has been housed have been carefully taken care of and handed down through the generations to the current day. The tea caddies and other Takatori Ware pieces that you've seen will be featured in my book on Takatori Ware. Well, over the course of the 17th century, taste in elite ceramics in Japan changed remarkably, as we've seen. Part of that change was due to the importation and development of enhanced ceramics technology, but much of it can be attributed to the dramatic change in government and society. From the chaotic world of 16th century Japan to the stable, if sometimes repressive, atmosphere of the 17th century, elite Japanese ceramics reflect the love of creativity and innovation that is one of the principal hallmarks of Japanese culture. Thank you very much.